One of the most common questions I get now that I've become Muslim is how I can reconcile equality. Now, I spoke a lot about justice already, and that led to people questioning whether the misogyny or homosexuality or things like that in Islam are just. As a Westerner who lived as a secular atheist, I understand why these are big issues. These have always been deeply concerning problems, and these are some of the most emotionally charged conversations in both religious and secular spaces. But they deserve more than slogans. So I also want to be clear that I'm not speaking as an Islamic scholar. I'm speaking as someone who spent most of his life as an atheist, studied the Western worldview, and has recently begun reading the Quran through the eyes of a believer. One of the biggest changes in my thinking, though, has been about the meaning of equality itself. As an atheist, I thought equality meant sameness. If justice was to be achieved, then everyone should occupy essentially the same social position, enjoy the same opportunities, and be free from every distinction that might become the basis for oppression. Difference itself became suspicious because history has so often used difference to justify domination. I don't think that concern was wrong. History gives us every reason to be skeptical of systems that have subordinated women, racial minorities, the disabled, and the poor. But I'm no longer convinced that equality and sameness are the same idea. One of the first things that struck me in the Quran was the profound spiritual equality of human beings. Adam and Eve are deceived together, they repent together, they are forgiven together. Unlike the version of the story I inherited growing up, Eve is not singled out as the one who led humanity astray. Each soul stands before God on the basis of its own life. No one bears the burden of another. That might seem like a small detail, but for me it changed the entire moral landscape. Because at the same time, the Quran doesn't seem interested in erasing every distinction between people. Creation itself is full of differences, night and day, land and sea, different languages, different peoples, male and female. Difference isn't presented as a flaw in creation. It is one of the ways creation manifests God's wisdom. That forced me to confront another assumption I'd carried for years. None of us enter the world radically free. We are thrown into a world already in progress. We inherit bodies, families, cultures, histories, temperaments, talents, limitations, opportunities, and obstacles long before we ever exercise our freedom. Some of those inheritances privilege us, others burden us. Neither in itself is a moral achievement or a moral failure. They are simply the conditions from which our freedom begins. Our equality has never consisted in possessing identical capacities. Our equality consists in the equal dignity of our souls and in our equal responsibility before God. That distinction has changed how I think about justice. Justice in this world is primarily a juridical and ethical matter. We owe one another fairness, protection, mercy, respect. But fair doesn't necessarily mean identical. A wheelchair ramp isn't unjust because everyone doesn't use it. It's just precisely because it acknowledges that different human beings flourish under different conditions. Creation gives us our differences. Society determines whether those differences become blessings or barriers. That's where I locate inequality, not in difference itself, but in the social choices that prevent people from flourishing according to the gifts and limitations they have been given. Some institutions may once have served genuine purposes and now no longer do. Others may have always been unjust. Human beings inherit mistakes just as surely as we inherit traditions. It is our responsibility to discern which is which, not because creation itself is flawed, but because our societies often are. This has also changed how I think about questions surrounding gender. I'm still studying, but I'm still becoming comfortable with many of the more traditional interpretations. However, I no longer assume that different responsibilities necessarily imply unequal worth. Nor do I think our task is to dictate how other people should live before we've even understood their lives. I've spoken with Muslim women who describe the hijab as one of the deepest expressions of their relationship with God. I've spoken with others whose experiences have been very different. Both deserve to be heard before I presume to speak for them. The same humility extends towards questions of sexuality. Again, I'm still studying what the Quran says, but I'm not interested in pretending certainty where I don't have it. What I do know is that misogyny and homophobia are not uniquely religious problems. I've encountered them among atheists, among Marxists, among liberals, among conservatives, among Christians, among Muslims. Bigotry seems to be one of the humanity's oldest habits. Religion often becomes the language through which people defend it, but that doesn't necessarily mean religion created it. For me, that's where the greater jihad becomes so important. The struggle isn't merely against injustice in the world, it's against the arrogance that convinces me I understand another person's soul better than God does. Perhaps that's where I now differ from both some religious and some secular perspectives. I no longer believe liberation means abolishing every distinction until we all become interchangeable individuals, nor do I believe justice means preserving every inherited tradition simply because it is old. Human beings are finite creatures. We need homes, communities, responsibilities, traditions, shelter. The answer to oppression cannot simply be to tear down every house. It must also be to build houses large enough that every person has a place within them, not because we're all the same, but because we're all equally worthy of belonging. That, at least for me, is what equality has begun to mean. Not sameness, not hierarchy, but equal dignity before God, equal justice before one another, and the shared responsibility to help every human being become the fullest expression of the soul they were created to be. The Quran doesn't begin with radically free individuals, it begins with radically responsible souls.